Bienvenue, hola, bienvenido, hello. Um, so this is elevating consciousness through music, according to what that says back there. And I hope you all got the playlists that I sent you to email. If you didn't, let me know, please. But actually, that was supposed to be a joke. I didn't send any play mail. But I'm really just here to talk to you today about my personal journey here. I'm more of a DJ than anything else, so even though I may have credentials or experience or expertise, I'd really like to speak to you today as someone who's just a fan of music and a fan of humanity. I think I should just provide some background about my actual career. I'm technically a nonprofit consultant who advises projects on how to use music to advocate for causes or advance certain societal ends such as social justice or, I guess, global connection. And music has always been a human joy, and multiple nonprofits have always felt the need to harness its power to affect good. But again, I'm still mostly a DJ. And over the past few weeks, I've been thinking about what it means to speak with you here today. And I was using words like improvisation or collaboration or consciousness even, but what really kind of popped out to me in the experience I had here and what I feel obligated to speak to you about is something more improvisational, which is what you've given me. I've sensed a tremendous feeling of sincerity, and everyone who's come here tonight or today has been part of an experiment in what happens when we have a collective sincerity and a collective consciousness. I personally view sincerity as the absence of cynicism. Cynicism is a self-protective action. You harness your pessimism to protect yourself and predict the future cynically, whereas I feel sincerity is an optimistic action, and I feel everyone who's come here to this festival these past 2 days has exposed their own sincerity and the vulnerability and the humility that comes with it. If we were to have a festival of insincerity, I think I would just call it society. But we're not dealing with society today. We're dealing with something much greater, and I think that's our collective consciousness. And I feel that despite the cynicism and despite all of the self-indulgent elements that we are forced or encouraged to pursue, I'd like to talk about just the simple aspect of our consciousness, which is sincerity. And I think the best way to do so is not to knock stuff over off the podium, but to talk about my personal experiences. I've learned enough through my nonprofit background to know that storytelling is the most effective way to convey a message. And I hope you allow for me to share my story with you today, not to convince or explain, but just to share. I was born in New York as a mixed child of an Arab mother and an African-American father, and although I went to very good schools, it was pretty clear that my education was going to come through music. My humanistic education was going to come through music. I found more information and more humanity within my father's record collection than I did in all the schools I went to. So with that said, I figured that at the beginning, I was trying to, despite my educational background, create a more humanistic connection with what I was learning, and music was the language of that connection. It challenged me to understand and express my own humanity, and it challenged me to share with others. It provided me opportunities to collaborate and to sincerely share myself, and it allowed me to fall in love with the human experience and my fellow humanity as a way of loving myself. And it's undoubtedly been a message that I've heeded my whole life, music, but it's not a solitary message, and one of the themes that was important to me was collaboration. But you can't collaborate without sincerity. And that's kind of the theme of what I wanted to talk to you about today. It's sincerity is the opposite of cynicism. And my relationship with music has been trying to pursue the most sincere, truthful, and honest path I can to connect with the lessons of humanity that are contained within music, which are numerous. That's why it affects us so much. It's sort of ironic that I'm here in Barcelona to talk about this because it was 20 years ago that I first came here because of music. I was seeking connection. I was seeking to reverse what music had done to me in New York, which I will now tell you about. After my father's record collection, I began to experience desires to change from passive to active. I went from passive listening and enjoying the sounds of others to wanting to participate and engage and potentially even create using the sounds of others. Luckily for me, when I was growing up in the 90s in New York, rap music was really taking off. And it wasn't necessary to have an instrument or to be knowledgeable to create music. It was just happenstance, and I took advantage of it. I bought some equipment. I started doing what would be called beat making, for those who are not in the know. And I started to make my first sincere attempt to engage music, to interact with the collaborations of my ancestors along with the thoughts of my present generation. It was my first attempt to remove the academic from my learning experience and replace it with the human. And I pursued it, and it was, quite frankly, no different than the effects that some of the speakers have discussed regarding the hallucinogenic drugs they've taken. I was plugged into humanity, and I was overdosing. And it was giving me a knowledge and a template to develop my own emotions and then potentially contribute back to it. So rap music became my outlet. I was able to take the sounds of others, reconfigure them, and make them my own, or so I thought. But slowly and surely, it revealed itself to be something a little different. And I'd like to share with you where it went wrong, because I think that's what the tension is in my sincerity, cynicism paradigm that I've created. It's just known within rap culture that it's not a sharing culture. That may surprise many of you today because they're 20 years down the line, everyone's on the internet and social media sharing their work. At the beginning, it wasn't like that. A lot of that is due to the socioeconomic background of many of the people involved in the music, especially in New York. These are coming from marginalized communities where sharing is not in your best interest, nor is it in the interest of your personal brand. So I lived in a world where even though I was exploring and creating, I was discouraged from sharing it. Sharing it was only done to impress or manipulate others or to show my own superiority because the world was so competitive. And I started to, even though I was successful in this, I started to become disenchanted with the way I was using the music that had so affected me. I was using it to beat others into submission with how special and cool my creation was. People would ask me questions about my influences, and I was not allowed to share it. So you can imagine how that affected my consciousness. I was in a closed circuit. I was creating music I liked, but it was with the intent not to harm, but not to connect. It was meant to impress. It was meant to build my personal brand. And as you can imagine, that's not a healthy state of being. And it's definitely not a healthy state for collaboration, which to me is still the heart of consciousness. But without the sincerity, you can't collaborate. I was looking to control with my own creations. And that's not really what creation is for. It's meant to be shared and potentially even collectively enhanced. So after a short time of indulging my self-interest with rap music, I was really thirsty for something. It was my consciousness was thirsty. And what it was thirsty for was true human connection, not to work with a computer, but to work with my peers, as peers, as collaborators, not as competitors. And by chance, my friend and I moved to Barcelona in 2001, and I needed to make some money here. So I started DJing. And at the time, I didn't really understand what I was getting into, but that DJing experience here about 20 years ago, without getting into the details of the nightlife in Barcelona and stuff, because this is a family festival, I found myself in a position to use the music that I had accumulated to affect others on the dance floor. And I think maybe the dance floor is the most sincere place on earth. I am a musician, so I don't particularly like to dance, but I understand the power of dance. And I was always jealous of those who felt free enough and connected enough with the music to dance. I was more interested in being cool and staying back in the background and watching. And I would feel this jealousy, which is also incredibly human, of those dancing. Even here at this party, I was trying to dance and it was a disaster. But I watched everyone else dance and I was so impressed with the sincerity of the emotion to physically let yourself go. I can't do that. And I know my limits, but as a DJ, I was allowed to surpass those limits. I was allowed to share my music and all the sensibilities and sensitivities that I had developed authentically and sincerely. I was able to share them not with the hope to impress anybody, but to make them enjoy themselves, to make them realize their own consciousness, to make them literally spend kinetic energy because of something I shared with them. And of course, that energy came back to me. And I know a lot of DJs pride themselves on having obscure collections and playing what they want to play. And they're sort of snobs about it. But I was the opposite. I would have played anything that made anyone feel good. So for 3 years, I was DJing in Barcelona. I'm sure you've known some of these clubs and Sonar and the whole deal. But it was the human connection that was the reason I stayed. And I had never had anything like it until I started to use my music collection to create connection, not competition. I found that some of the most lonely moments of my life have been just me trying to look at my records alone for myself when I really want to share them with somebody else. And DJing gave me the chance to do that. Of course, my consciousness was affected because I had finally allowed you to enter it. I had finally allowed the audience to sincerely share with me what I was hoping to affect them with. And I wouldn't say it was paradise for those 3 years, but it was pretty close. And like paradise, it had to end. And I found myself returning to New York City a few years later, hoping to become an adult, hoping to put behind the naive or childish search for human connection, and maybe even revert to the framework that society rewards us for, which is a more cynical and manipulative one. I came home looking for a job. That's a very humanistic need I'm sure we all have shared. And I was willing to compromise pretty much anything, including my own consciousness, to achieve that. I was lucky, and after a few years, I was able to find a media job, if you will, with some nonprofits, and it allowed me to start to take the sensibilities and the humanistic yearning that I had for greater connection, and it allowed me to venture across the world to many countries, meeting people and working with projects that were trying, again, to use music as a way to do good. What is better than that? I'm finally harnessing all of my human development to actually assist the people who need help, and I felt great about it for about 1.5 years. Until I realized that the power of music that I had employed as a DJ and so enjoyed sharing, I was now using to manipulate people again. I wasn't using music or playing music to connect. I was playing them with music. I was trying to solicit donations or apply for grants for noteworthy causes, for the environment, for women's health, you name it, but at a tremendous cost to my consciousness, because once you start applying the cynical lens of capitalism or monetization to your consciousness, you lose it. That compromise is deadly to the consciousness. I had worked in nonprofits for long enough to know of the the tone-deaf but eager problem solver who used all their sensibilities and sensitivities without actually even asking what the problem was. What is needed to connect here? What is truly collaboration? I found myself traveling to countries looking to extract the music for my collection, but not for my own self-interest, not for my own personal enjoyment, but for capturing moments that would allow me to play on the emotions of the audience, that would allow me the ability to make you open your wallets or give me your email address. Very tangible, non-profit results. I was asking myself questions about my relationship to my own music and my own consciousness, not because anything had evolved other than, if anything, something had devolved. I had returned to the manipulative model that I found, but I was justifying it through self-interest and having to make a living. I spent several years advising, consulting, teaching, but I wasn't connecting. I wasn't letting the music tell me what to do with it. I was enlisting the music towards my ends. And that self-interested, pragmatic, adult approach wasn't allowing me to sleep at night, and it definitely wasn't allowing me to create or enjoy music in the same way. So I definitely felt something was wrong because the force that had sustained me my entire life was now foreign to me. Music had become a commodity. It had become something that I was an expert at deploying to emotionally affect people, cynically, not sincerely. Even if the goal was sincere, my treatment of the music was not. So, of course, you can't have an abusive relationship with your consciousness and expect to be happy. I thought I was going to come here today to talk to you about the lessons to be learned about the ethics of how to apply music in certain situations and whether or not we can consciously compromise our values in the name of a good cause, and the ethics behind exploiting culture and calling it entrepreneurialism. That was going to be what I was going to talk to you about and potentially even leave you with some relevant information. But I decided the only thing I can really do if I'm interested in being sincere is to talk to you about how I sincerely feel. And then it has nothing to do with what I just mentioned. It has to do with that human connection that led me to music in the first place. And I just want to take it to a personal level now. What caused me to experience, I guess, a revelation about my relationship to music and affected my consciousness was the loss of my best friend and my musical partner. He died in a sudden plane accident in November. This is someone who I had played music with one-on-one for 10 years and had shared my soul with and invited him to share his with mine. And the loss of that opportunity to share myself was felt so acutely that I decided I needed to share with you today how I have evolved my thinking about consciousness as a result of the loss of the human connections I have made through music. I decided that consciousness is really just love. And true love is always sincere. I had involuntarily engaged and connected with this person, this magnificent person, because of music. It was our love language. It allowed me to experience a depth of emotion that it took loss for me to realize what I had accomplished. That underneath my nose the whole time, while I was pontificating and questioning my existence and musical and all that other stuff, I already had the connection. I already had the passion for humanity. But it wasn't revealed until it was taken away. My sincerity that I applied to that relationship wasn't revealed until it was taken away. And so this isn't really about a tremendous hole that I have that I need to fill in my consciousness. This is just reaffirming that I could never have done any of this emotional growth without sincerely being open to the messages of humanity as conveyed through music. And there's a certain level of humility and a certain level of vulnerability that I'm still challenged to achieve. But by sharing this with you today, my personal story, it's cathartic, of course, because it explains how I got here. But it's more important, not that I feel better. It's more important that I think, at least to me, that I acknowledge the vulnerability we were all engaged in by being here together, and how fleeting it is, and how momentary it is, and how it can be taken away. So I'm not a pessimist. I've never been more of an optimist about the passion for humanity and humanism as I am now. Unfortunately, it took a great loss to cause this reflection. But I don't think I could have gained this insight without that loss. And it is that insight that has made me decide to come here today, not as someone to teach or to reveal, but just to share sincerely. And I hope that you consider these words to be a tribute to the energy that we've created here through our sincerity, and that the organizers of this festival have concretized and put into being based on sincerity. And once you have that sincerity, you're opened up to true love, and you are then speaking the language of consciousness. And you don't need to be a DJ to know that, but you definitely need to be a human. So that's pretty much it. I have nothing to leave you with other than an appreciation for your feeding me and reaffirming the importance of sincerity as I pursue an attempt to elevate my own consciousness, and hopefully collectively we can be sincere enough to elevate our collective consciousnesses. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, and I look forward to more events like this in the future because they're life-affirming, and they're proof that I'm not alone in the passion I have for humanity and for humanism. And I just want to thank you all for being here today.